Welcome to The Exchange. I'm Dan Riley. The Exchange is a streaming internet talk show and podcast of interviews with noteworthy people about their lives, ideas, and current events. This week I sit down with Terry Plank, president of the board of directors of the Clergy Project. During our conversation, Terry talks about his journey from Christian pastor to atheist and the work of the Clergy Project, which provides support and encouragement to former and current members of the clergy who no longer believe in the supernatural. Well, Terry, thank you so much for coming on the show and taking some time to talk today.
That's my pleasure.
Cool. I'd love to start by learning a little bit more about your background. I know at one point in your life you were a religious person, if I remember correctly. I'd love to hear kind of the story of how you became religious and how you became non-religious.
So you have a 3-hour program? Well, basically, I was not raised in the church. So when I got married, my wife and I met and married in about 6 months. And, of course, that quick of a relationship, you don't know a heck of a lot about each other when it gets right down to it. Of course, that was 53 years ago, so it worked out fine. But at that point, it was a little disorientation with relationship and what is life about, and my family different than hers. So she went back to the church of her upbringing. Wasn't the same church, but in the same denomination. And I followed along. And I was explaining this at a conference we had with the American Humanist Association, that it was kind of like I just jumped on this train, the church train, so to speak. And there's kind of 2 tracks, I think of it, for on the church train. One is the dogma and all the teaching, which we all discuss a whole lot about. But the other track really is that of community. So I think we think of the church and religion as a monorail rather than 2 rails. So it was that community that really pulled me in and got me interested. And eventually, of course, then I did got up with a dogma. And so I eventually became an elder with that church, was the Church of Christ. There are 3 branches of the Church of Christ. There's a very liberal one called the Disciples. And there's one called Church of Christ, which is conservative. And then there's a non-instrumental Church of Christ, which doesn't believe they should use instruments. Like Pepperdine, if you've heard of Pepperdine University, they founded that. So I got more and more involved, went to Minneapolis to do work on an MFA, and dropped out back there and went to work in a hardware company. And we moved back to California eventually and worked for Sears and Ward's and in hardware. And then I got this brilliant idea that I could combine my theater work with the BA in theater and acting and that sort of thing with my, faith. So I thought, ministries makes most sense in the world. Let's go do that. The difficulty with that is that my wife, Pat, had left an involvement with a guy who was going to be a minister and didn't go to Bible college. Because she just wanted to break out and move forward in some new ways. And that's when she met me at Long Beach State University. So when I wanted to do that, she was freaking out. Like, I don't want to be married to a minister. And the irony of that is the fellow she broke up with became a high school principal. And I became a pastor. So I went to seminary, the Fuller Theological Seminary, which is in Pasadena. This is started by an evangelist, Fuller, his name, hence the name of the seminary. And it's a conservative seminary that has all different denominations that are part of it, conservative, everything from Episcopal to Assembly of God, broad variety, but a very conservative environment and a very biblically based study and research type institution. So I studied the Old Testament in Hebrew and New Testament in Greek. All of the work we did in the New Testament and Old Testament was done with the original documents. Not that I could speak it or anything, but we could read it. So, through that process, I got deeper and deeper involved with the theology and understanding what, everything was about from the past. Wasn't any questioning there. I know there's a lot of talk now, if you read some of the books on people that they call seminary cemetery, meaning they'd lose their faith there. But in a conservative environment like I was in at Fuller, that wasn't the case for anybody I knew. we had a liberal seminary around the corner called Claremont. And that was the liberal right? The liberal seminary. And, we were totally tied into it. So my wife wanted me to go into the Presbyterian church because they were a lot more progressive than the Church of Christ. But I wanted to reform the church and make it more biblically based. Well, not more biblically based, but more intelligently directed, with more of an intellectual approach and a, deeper grounding. So I pastored maybe 4 different churches. One of those churches was in Venice, California, which is in Southern California. If you know of it, there's a boardwalk there. So I used to have long hair and Birkenstocks, and I would preach the love of Jesus. And we'd have a Sunday afternoon gathering out there, and we'd preach and talk. And so, and then I ended up here in Half Moon Bay area, because we needed to leave that area because, I loved it. I think it was the best place I ever lived. For my daughters, it was really too difficult with all the drugs and the alcohol and the different groups fighting with each other. There was a black ghetto, a Chicano ghetto, the white ghetto over there in the marina right next to us. All different types of spiritual dimensions. It was a hard place. It was a street kind of life. So moved up here in this nice community and pastored a church called the Coastside Christian Church or Coastside Christian Community. I have to remember that was 30 years ago. Built that up, but in the process, all along, well, not all along, but probably from Venice on, I had completely internalized the reality of the teachings of the Scripture. So I believed that the things that were happening in the New Testament church should be happening in my ministry. So I believed that prayer should be answered and that people should be being healed and that people would be coming in droves to the faith if you preached right. So I internalized that and thought there was something wrong with me. So unlike a lot of people you will hear who by study and realizing that the inconsistencies of the Bible or using the critical thinking tools and whatever else they discovered, God isn't real or church isn't right. That wasn't my progress at all. Mine was weeping and crying that I couldn't. There was something wrong with me. God, why is my ministry not being honored? Why can't you honor my ministry? What am I doing wrong? Well, after a couple of years, it gets kind of old. So I began to look more internally to find out, what is it about religion, Christ, Jesus, whatever, that really is the most important part for me. And I realized that it was that sense of peace and inner stability and strength. And so I began to study alternatives to doing that. First I started reading the Desert Fathers and all their writings about mysticism. And then I moved out from there to study the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish mystical tradition, and there's the Hindu tradition, and I sat Zazen for a while in San Francisco, Zen Buddhism. And what I discovered in the process was, wow, they all have this basically common thread. The thing that's the same is really doesn't have anything to do with God. It has to do with what happens internally through meditation, through directing yourself into your own inner thoughts, stabilizing those, looking out to others, learning, growing, being committed to a community, to other people, and to their influence. Those are the kind of things that brought the stability. So it was like, whoops, they all have their beliefs on God. And they're all kind of different, and they all have different religious practices, and they can't all be right, but they all have this one common core. Must be a human experience, wouldn't you say? So, the train got derailed at that point. So, there just doesn't need to be a God. It's a human experience. So,
and when you begin to have these revelations internally, are you still a pastor? Were you still?
Oh yes, I was doing all of that up until the very end, and I was still pastoring that little church here in Half Moon Bay, and I didn't really share any of that with anybody. It wasn't appropriate. I already had a part-time job working in a retail store, to supplement the income because it was a small church. And so I just resigned, said that I was had a job offer with them, and I went full-time back into retail. Interesting thing to me, I don't know what's interesting to anybody else, but when the church tried to struggle along for a while on its own, but just couldn't quite pull it off because you really need a central person to help facilitate things, because we were basically a kind of a community where I facilitated rather than, led as the pastor, preaching on high. So after I left and they finally disbanded, some of the people went off into the Assembly of God. Some of the people went off into Gurdjieff work, which is a Russian mystic tradition. Some of them went nowhere. Some of them went to a charismatic Catholic church. Some of them went back to the regular church. They scattered, 10 different directions, which to me, I thought said a lot about the fact that the dogma is not what was so important to those people, which I don't think is to most Christians. What was important was community, fellowship, caring, sharing, being together. Because I never really preached dogma anyway. I was basically preaching, life and how to live well with each other and with the world. And so I think that for me, anecdotal evidence does bear out. What I think is true in most cases. I mean, we hear so much about the conservative evangelical movement and the right, and we read so much about the South and what it's like there. But, that's really only a small percentage. I mean, the whole conservative movement is, I don't know what percentage it is, but it couldn't be more than maybe 25% of the religious, quote, people who believe in God. Well, where are all the rest of those people? Well, they're in Episcopal church or sitting in Catholic churches, perhaps. There are all kinds of different places where they're in very liberal environments that they don't preach this hellfire and damnation and, kind of thing. What they're preaching is caring and warmth and love and generosity of spirit and compassion and, helping the poor, that kind of thing.
When you finally decided it was time for you to resign from the church, did you know that your belief in God was shaken? And if so, did you feel guilty for not coming forward with your potential new identity, with your new thoughts about Christianity or religion in general?
No, it was a great relief because remember, I was internally, I was agonizing, what's wrong with me? So what I was discovering was, damn thing wrong with me. It's this belief system that's the issue, not me. So it was just a great relief, and I never looked back. So I don't have any animosity towards it particularly. Interestingly enough, our daughters were raised in the church. So when I came out, when I was probably around 40, somewhere along in there, would have been 40? I would have been older than that. Well, anyway, they were in their 30s and whatever. They needed to then face themselves. What do they believe? Where are they coming from in their life? And interestingly enough, they both decided that they didn't believe either. So basically, they have raised their families, and they have great relationships, and neither of our daughters would consider themselves Christians, except for one grandchild. The other two are basically atheists. In fact, one grandson, when he was 12, figured out what it took me, 40 some odd years to figure out. All gods can't be correct from all the different religions, so it must be how you're trained. I'm out of here. So he figured that out at age 12.
How long did it take you time afterwards to fully come out as a non-believer to your friends and family after you had the change of mind, or was that something that you were very comfortable doing immediately?
It was just something that evolved. I didn't feel like I needed to say it to anybody or in all my life, until I've gotten involved with the Clergy Project, basically, I just walked away. I didn't feel a need to proclaim atheism. I didn't even think of myself as an atheist. I didn't think of myself as anything other than a man who was free, a free thinker, if you want to use that terminology. Again, there is a strong free thought movement, by the way. To me, I just moved on. But that's kind of how I am. I can go deeply into something, but I move on. After I went into retailing, I went back to school and for 2 years and got a master's degree and became a psychotherapist. And then after some odd years of doing that, I ended up starting a business doing weddings and search marketing. So then I went into search marketing. So it's just kind of probably a lot to do with my upbringing. My parents, I was born in 41, so they were struggling back there in Kansas. My dad was a teacher. My mother was trained as a teacher. Couldn't make a living out there, so they're moving all over the place. So I was probably in a different community every year or two until we moved to California when I was 11. But those formative years was moving around, and you go from place to place and you set up your new life. So I think some of that kind of set me up for my whole life to be able to go deeply into something, but to be able to walk away, without any regrets or need to belittle the past. Yeah. So I've never been one of those strong atheists that, like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, coming out of the crowd of the cloud of reason, Dawkins and all those folks with great writing and an important thing to do, especially when we see how in some areas of the world religion has a pretty devastating effect, and we would probably like to get rid of it. That was never my interest particularly. So I never felt guilty, or I never felt like I needed to proclaim it. So if anybody would have asked, I would say I didn't believe in God. But, most people don't ask. Right. So, and I never shared it. There was no need to.
And what was the change within yourself after you left religion generally? You mentioned the word free earlier. What sort of things were different? Did you feel free to think certain thoughts or do certain things, or how did you change?
Well, I think it's like you said, you're free to not have to rely on some kind of a scriptural basis for life. You can, but I don't think I really thought a lot about that. It's kind of like all of the work we do when we think about history. History, when you try to go to your memory, most of the research is showing us now is that memory is not very reliable. That basically each time you want to remember something, you recreate the memory. So it changes so much over time. It's been over 30 years. I don't even know what kind of progression I might have gone through, because I can only guess at it from what I think in my memory. But my memory is that I was then free to explore like I was. I was more free to explore like I was. Because remember, I was looking outside of traditional church and everything. And I could then continue that. So now I could learn from every place. I could learn from the encyclopedia. I could learn from TV. I could learn from other educational experiences. I didn't have to rely on the teachings of a scripture that was laid out by a bunch of men, many men, over a period of time that, in my view now, is the best and the worst of humanity. Yeah.
You mentioned the Clergy Project. Give a brief description of what the Clergy Project is and how it started. What's the genesis story there?
Well, the genesis is kind of interesting. It started with Richard Dawkins and Dan Barker having a discussion, and Reykjavik, I can never pronounce that, at a conference they were at, somewhere over there in the Scandinavian countries, talking about Dan Barker's experience. He was a Pentecostal minister who had left the faith, become an atheist, and worked in a major organization called Freedom from Religion with his wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor. So they had some discussions there. And then some research was done by Dan Dennett, who's a philosopher, and Linda Lascola, who's a professional researcher. And they don't really remember quite how they got into studying this, but they began to realize that there was an underbelly of the church. And that underbelly was many men and women who were functioning in the church but were not believers. So they began to do some research on that, publish that research. Dan Barker then, in relationship with Richard Dawkins, began to realize, wow, maybe, how can we help these people? And Dan had been gathering a list of ex-pastors for years and years and years. And he took that particular list of his, and they began to go out and explore and bring in other people. So they finally ended up with about 52 men and women that were either in the church as unbelievers in supernatural, or recently out or been outed for years, what we would now call those currently in ministry and those who were former. And they pulled those 52 together. Richard Dawkins supported the founding of a website, public website, and then the founding of a private website, which you have to be invited into, where most of the community happens. So they got all that established. The Dawkins Foundation continued to support both of those websites. The Freedom from Religion Foundation handled all the financial work, any donations, anything that would come through. They kept all the records until we became a 501c3. So just about 6 months ago, we finally became our own private 501c3, and now we function completely on our own with all the finances and the recording of it and the hosting of our two sites. But it was primarily the work of Richard Dawkins supporting, Dan Barker facilitating and working with all his 52 original charter members in forming an online community. So the primary way that TCP has functioned up until now is through that private community. So they set up a forum where people could then go on and communicate freely and openly in a protected environment. So it's totally protected, designed the site so that no one could break into it. And then people, at first, people were brought in without a lot of screening, just general discussion and talk to, figured that each one fulfilled two requirements. One, they no longer believe in the supernatural. And two, they were either currently or serving in ministry or were former religious leaders. So we think of it now, we call it the Clergy Project, but the better way to think of it is that it's current or ex-religious leaders.
Right.
So as that began to form and coalesce together, we eventually had some pretty good exposure by two of our members going public, and one of them at the Atheist Convention, American Atheist Convention. And as they became quite public, and both were kicked out of their churches through the process, that would be Jerry DeWitt and Teresa McBain. We got a lot more exposure to the rest of the world. So we began to grow quite a bit from there. So from that 52, which was in 2011, now as 2015, almost to the month, I think it was March in 2011, to that point, now we're up to 640 members. And let's see, 86% are male, 14% female. There's 177 who are currently serving but do not believe in the supernatural. And there's 448, which would be 72%, that are formers. And the formers can range anywhere from somebody who left yesterday to somebody like myself who's 74 years old and quit 30 years ago.
And these people, when they come and they're accepted, they come in and they're interested in having online discussions and a safe place to communicate openly about what they're going through. Are they anonymous when they're doing that communication, or is their true identity revealed within the community? That's up to each person. But if a person is still currently serving, we encourage them to use a pseudonym. Okay. Sometimes they choose not to, but and that's their choice as long as they realize that they could be outed.
perhaps. But most of them will take on a pseudonym. Most of the people like myself will go by their actual name. So we have a blend of both of them. So there's very little exposure, or well, I shouldn't say very little. There's no exposure unless somebody goes out and talks out in the world. But we require them to agree at the beginning to terms of use, that you don't reveal any other member, even if they're already outed. You just don't reveal that kind of information. You ask them first if you want to talk about, even if they have been out for many years.
Right. And so is it a big chat room where everyone is communicating with each other, or is there more nuance to how the communication works?
Let me share it with us our current the current use of it. Originally, it was a forum that had. Well, I probably don't even need to go into how that was organized. Let me tell you how it's organized now.
Sure.
Now think of it as an online community. It is a way to make announcements and that sort of thing as well. But basically, we have 7 different forums on the site. And each forum is broken up into separate boards. We use WordPress and BuddyPress, which many of your listeners will know about. So each of the forums has a particular focus. Like one of them is for support encouragement. Another one is announcements for the TCP. Another one is on thinking, acting, sharing different things about religion and your background and that sort of thing. So of these different boards, we're able to shape, I wouldn't say shape the communication, but we're able to provide a platform where some people might want to go on and just answer and support and encourage the people who are sharing a problem and an issue. Others would like to go on and discuss something of a recent book or some theological idea or something that why we believe what we believe or don't believe, or something about humanism or books that are available. So we have a lot of discussions that will go on about that. But the core, the main reason for us existing is to support and encourage those who are currently serving. Right. So that's why the first board, or the first forum and its various boards, is a focus on that. The various boards within it, there's one on family and communication, community, one on ethics. So different boards have a different shape. That way people can find discussions that are going on and enter into them and follow them over time. There's a way with WordPress, BuddyPress, where you can subscribe to a thread and then you receive an email about it. So you can really keep pretty good tabs.
Are there themes for people generally, of the hundreds of people that are now within that database, for why they left religion as a former leader within a church, or is it difficult to find any commonality among many of them?
Well, I think it really varies. I think there's just a huge breadth of how that happens, and not everybody explains what they've done. Although we do have a spot where we have a profile for each person, so they can fill out their story, so we can know where they came from and what the experiences they went through. But I mean, there are just all kinds of threads. Some of it would be like myself. They simply seeing that the faith wasn't working for them and trying to figure out why. Some of them it was seeing the inconsistencies as they began to see this and see that the God of the Old Testament is so different than the God of the New Testament. And that among the Gospels, they're all kind of different. They all have a different focus, and they actually have some conflicting teachings. So what's that about? So some of them, looking at those inconsistencies, have then started studying and read to try to figure that out, and realized there's something amiss here. Others have been exposed to the writings of people like Erdman, or the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse with Dan Dennett and Barker, and I've forgotten the other two right off the top of my head here, but many have just read recent writings that have dealt with the inconsistencies of the Scripture.
I'd love to know if there are maybe a story or two of people that come to mind as being particularly remarkable or potentially courageous that you've learned about, of people that are either currently or former pastors or active members in their religious communities who left that really put a lot on the line to tell the truth and stand up for their identity. Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, this is a private community. I can't really, talk specifically, but I could refer to a couple who are completely outed that listeners can go, read about too. So I'm not speaking out of turn by mentioning them. One would be a gentleman who has a blog called Godless in Dixie. And Neil has a very interesting experience of having been outed by others. And he actually is a teacher now, and he had to deal with all those issues. But he has become a very strong participant now in the secular movement, not only with that blog, but also with freedom from religion. Or recovering from religion, excuse me. He's a group developer there and is working intimately with them and their work of helping people who are not necessarily clergy. Recovering from religion is kind of a companion type group. They even have a hotline, 24-hour hotline where people can call in and discuss and share and talk with trained agents. So that would be one individual. I mean, Dan Barker is probably another good one that is people have read a lot about. Dan was a Pentecostal minister, and he was a pianist, played for a prominent Pentecostal woman preacher, and he left the faith and began to share his newfound atheism, and eventually became part of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And he, with his wife, who actually her mother started that organization, they are very strong in all the positions of getting religion out of the schools. So they're really an advocacy type group for separation of church and state. Mm-hmm.
In relation to just the growth in numbers for the organization generally, do you feel like that's happening because it's part of a larger momentum shift within the world and within the country, or is it just that this is the first time there's ever been something like this where former or current pastors, ministers, et cetera, have a forum to communicate with each other?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's probably a combination of things. Yeah. Because of the explosion of material, both written and online, with blogs and forums and websites and Facebook and all that, I think there is an increasing awareness that these kind of issues are out there.
Right.
So I think part of it has to do with the internet. I think that's one of the threads, where more people can be exposed to different thoughts and different experiences and different teachings than what they've been exposed to before. So I think we were able to piggyback on that, of course. So I think part of it is the work that Dan Dennett and Linda LaScala did and the books that they've written. That became, the media became deeply aware of this. And of course, media will capitalize on things that are of greatest interest or whatever sexy at the time, I suppose, not to put a negative cast on media. But I think it caught struck a nerve. Like, oh, there's what? People who don't believe what they're preaching? What? And then sometimes the conservative evangelical movement helps us. There's a gentleman who's in the Southern Baptist organization that trashed us like mad all over the internet, and that was nothing but helpful because it got the message out. So I think some of it is a part of the times. Right. I think it's a part of the movement. I don't think that all the writings and the internet and all these sort of things are the main reason. The Pew Research now shows that there are 23% now nuns when was it 2007, something like that was done before. There were 14, and we now actually there are actually more people who call themselves nuns, N-O-N-E-S, nuns, than there are Catholics. So I think that's a lot of the movement.
In America.
Yeah, in America. Well, yeah, I'm just talking about the U.S.
Right.
Yeah. Because we actually are worldwide.
Right.
But I'm speaking mostly from the U.S. standpoint.
Yeah. Last question I would ask you. If someone's listening to this and is an active member of the clergy and is interested in either taking part in your community or learning more, what would be your suggestion for their next steps, for what they can really do to try to get some help?
Yeah. Well, first, I would suggest they go to clergyproject.org, and you can read all about us up there, see statistics, but you can also see a section that we started about 6 months ago called Our Stories. So you can actually go on, and those men and women who have authorized it have their stories posted there, and they're also broken down by denomination. So if a person happens to be a Southern Baptist, you can go in and check out a few of the experiences of our members who are Southern Baptists or Mormon or whatever background you happen to be. We actually have a couple of members who are Muslim in other countries, from other countries. But that'd be the best place to go, and you can read all about it there. And then there is a join section there, so a person can then fill out that form. And like I said, there are 2 requirements to be part of the Clergy Project. One is that you no longer believe in the supernatural. We're not an evangelistic organization. We're not trying to convince people that atheism is right. We aren't even concerned about atheism. We have humanists, agnostics. Everything is a part of it. They just don't believe in the supernatural. Right. The other requirement would be that you were in some kind of professional religious service. So Mormons are not paid in the same way in many other positions of leadership, or Jehovah's Witness or some other groups, like you would be in the Presbyterian Church, let's say. So not everyone is ordained, but all of them were serving in a professional capacity. So we have a way of evaluating Jehovah's Witness and Mormon and other groups that have different type of religious leadership than you would experience in the more traditional churches. Right. But so they just have to have been in professional ministry. So we aren't there for people who were deacons or elders or very strongly involved in their churches, right, if they were not in a professional capacity, because we're simply not able to meet their needs. Right. We're trying to meet specifically the needs of those who have this common experience. The others we recommend go to Recovering from Religion Foundation.
Gotcha. Well, Terry, thank you so much for taking some time and talking about your story and the Clergy Project today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you're interested in learning more about the Exchange, want to listen to episodes online, or would like to reach out to the show, feel free to visit the show's website at theexchangeshow.com.